A lonely iron robot with glowing blue eyes stands in a vast gray wasteland of scrap metal and rust, with a cold wind blowing dust across the barren landscape. No plants or animals are visible, only piles of junk and a gloomy sky. On a planet where everything was made of metal and rust, there lived a robot named Cog. Cog was tall and strong, with gears that clanked and eyes that glowed a soft blue. But the world around him was silent and gray. No birds sang. No trees swayed. Only the wind howled across the endless desert of scrap and steel. Cog had no friends. He spent his days walking the same empty paths, feeling a lonely whir in his chest that never went away. A tall, blue-eyed robot with visible gears crouches on a rusted, metallic, gray desert planet. He gently touches a single bright green sprout growing from a crack in the scrap-covered ground, looking curious and amazed. One day, while kicking a dented can, Cog noticed something strange. A small sprout of green poked through a crack in the rusted ground. Cog tilted his head, gears clicking in wonder. He had never seen anything so bright or soft. He knelt carefully, his metal fingers trembling, and touched the tiny leaf. It was warm. "Hello," he whispered, though he wasn't sure why. A rusted robot boy kneeling on cracked, gray ground, gently touching a single bright green sprout growing from a fissure. The sprout glows slightly, contrasting with the dark sky and scattered machine debris. The robot's metallic hand trembles near the leaf, his glowing blue eye fixed on it in wonder. The sprout shivered, as if answering. Cog's optics widened. He had heard stories of the surface once being covered in green, but those were just old tales from the before times. He looked around at the broken machines and gray dust, then back at the fragile leaf. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "It's too sharp, too dry." But the sprout only grew a little taller, its stem reaching toward the pale sun. Cog felt a strange humming in his chest, not from his gears, but from somewhere deeper. He decided right then he would protect it. A small robot with glowing eyes and rusted metal parts carefully places a tiny green sprout with one delicate leaf into a cracked ceramic cup filled with dark soil, surrounded by gray dust and broken machine parts, dim sunlight filtering through haze. Cog scooped a handful of the gray dust and let it fall through his metal fingers. It was useless for growing things. Every bot knew that. But the sprout had chosen him anyway. He found a cracked cup near a rusted pipe and filled it with the least dusty soil he could scrape together. With trembling hands, he nested the sprout inside, pressing the dirt gently around its stem. "There," he whispered, "a home." The sprout's leaf seemed to tilt toward him, as if listening. For the first time in many long cycles, Cog felt less like a machine and more like a gardener. A small green sprout nested in a cracked cup on a dusty metal ledge, with a single beam of sunlight from a gap above illuminating it, in a dim underground machine city. Wide angle, glowing highlights on the sprout's leaves. Cog placed the cracked cup on a ledge where a sliver of sunlight found its way through the rusted ceiling. He checked on the sprout every hour, prodding the soil with a careful finger. The sprout did nothing but sit there, green and small, as if it had always belonged in that cup. That night, as Cog powered down for recharge, he wondered if he dreamed. And if he did, would a sprout appear in those dreams too? A rusty, dimly lit room with a single sunbeam shining onto a cracked cup sitting in a patch of dirt. A small green sprout with a curved stem grows from the cup. A robot with glowing blue eyes stands beside it, casting a protective shadow. The atmosphere is quiet and hopeful. Page 6. The next morning, Cog's optics flickered to life. The first thing he saw was the cup. The sprout had grown. It was taller now, its stem curving toward the sliver of light like a question mark. Cog tilted his head. He carried the cup to a patch of dirt, where the sunbeam was strongest, setting it down with a gentle clink. "You are thirsty," he said, though he had no water to give. So he stood guard, his metal frame casting a shadow that kept the sprout safe from the dripping rust above. A small robot with glowing optics stands beside a cracked wall. A tiny green sprout with one leaf in a cup on dirt. A beam of sunlight illuminates the scene, showing the robot's hand near the cup as a gentle breeze blows through the crack. A drop of rust fell from the ceiling, but it missed the sprout. Cog saw something else. A crack in the wall let in a tiny breeze. He put his hand beside the cup, feeling the air flow past his metal fingers. "Maybe you need wind," he whispered. That's when he heard a small, soft pop. A tiny leaf had unfolded from the sprout, green and bright as a signal flare. A small mechanical robot with glowing blue eyes gently holding a cup with a tiny green sprout growing two bright leaves. A crack in a stone wall lets in a warm sunbeam and a breeze that rustles the leaves. The robot's metal fingers are near the cup, and its face shows a soft smile. Simple, warm, children's book illustration style. Cog stared at the leaf, his gears whirring with wonder. "Hello?" he said softly. The leaf seemed to tremble in the breeze. He moved the cup closer to the crack, and warm sunlight spilled across the tiny plant. Another pop came, and a second leaf uncurled, reaching toward the light like a tiny hand. Cog smiled, his metal cheeks creaking. "You like that, don't you?" He whispered. "Sun and wind. I'll remember." A small robot with glowing glass eyes carefully carries a tiny green sprout in a cracked teacup, standing in a dusty junk room with warm sunlight streaming through a window. Cog looked around the junk room, his glass eyes glowing. "I need to find you a proper home," he said. He spotted a cracked teacup on a shelf and carefully carried the sprout toward it, cupping the delicate leaves in his metal fingers as if handling a treasure. A dusty, chipped teacup on a wooden shelf holds a small, wilted flower and a tiny green sprout. A robot with glowing glass eyes gently places the sprout inside, his metal fingers cupped protectively. Soft light from a nearby window illuminates the scene, casting warm shadows. The teacup was chipped and dusty, and from it, a small, wilted flower smiled. "Hello," it whispered. Cog set the sprout gently inside, beside the flower. "You'll be safe here," he said. "We'll find a sunny spot." The sprout unfurled a tiny leaf, as if to say thank you. A steampunk-style scene. A small boy with goggles holding a chipped teacup on a dusty windowsill. Inside, a wilted flower and a tiny green sprout catching a single beam of light, surrounded by gears and springs in a cluttered workshop. Warm sepia tones with soft glow. Cog carried the teacup carefully through the cluttered workshop, stepping over gears and springs. The wilted flower leaned toward the sprout. Together, it whispered. Cog set them on a windowsill, where a single beam of dusty light crept in. "This will do," he said. The sprout reached for the light, and the teacup seemed to glow. A rusty robot gently touching a glowing teacup on a dusty windowsill. A tiny green sprout reaches toward a single beam of golden light. Beside them, a wilted flower with one petal slightly open, all set in a dim workshop filled with scattered gears and springs. The light wrapped around the sprout like a golden ribbon, and the teacup began to hum. A soft, worn-out tune. Cog touched its handle. The flower's wilted petals trembled, then opened a tiny crack. "I remember song," whispered the flower. The sprout leaned closer, its green tip brushing the crack. "Then grow," Cog said. And for the first time in years, the teacup held not just dust, but hope. A child's hand gently touching a blue teacup on a dusty wooden shelf. From the cup, a glowing pink flower with a crack in its petal leans toward a green sprout with small leaves. A soft golden ribbon of light wraps around both, and tiny musical notes float in the air. The background is dim and cozy, with specks of dust sparkling in the light. The teacup shivered, a single note escaping its porcelain shell. Cog's hand felt warmth bloom beneath his touch. The flower's crack widened, and a pale pink glow leaked out, pulsing like a heartbeat. The sprout's leaves unfurled, reaching for the light. "More," sighed the flower. Cog closed his eyes and hummed the tune. Old and cracked, but steady. The teacup sang back, a thin, clear hum. In the dark room, the sprout grew taller, its stem spiraling toward the flower. Together, they made a melody of dust and green. Cog smiled. A close-up of a glowing pink flower in a child's hand, with a tiny queen bee waking inside the petals, a teacup beside it emitting a soft musical note, dark, dusty room background, magical warm lighting, whimsical children's book illustration style. The song wove around them, binding spring and porcelain in a single thread of sound. Cog opened his eyes. The flower now glowed fully, a soft pink star in the palm of his hand. Its petals had opened wide, revealing a tiny, sleeping queen bee nestled inside, curled like a comma on a page. The bee stirred, her wings flickering, and the teacup chimed a gentle lullaby. Cog held his breath. The world outside the room, the ticking clocks, the dust motes, the silent shelves, seemed to wait with him. Then the bee opened her eyes, tiny and black, and looked right at Cog. "You fixed the song," she buzzed, her voice a shimmer of glass and honey. "Now we must sing it back to the world." A dusty attic window with a boy holding a glowing pink flower, a tiny golden queen bee perched on the glass, and a frozen gray garden visible outside, cobwebs and old teacups around, soft, magical light. Cog stood up slowly, the glowing flower still cupped in his hands. The tiny queen bee stretched her legs and yawned, a puff of golden pollen escaping her lips. "Follow me," she buzzed, and fluttered up toward the highest shelf. Cog climbed after her, stepping on piles of chipped saucers and old teapots. At the top, hidden behind a curtain of cobwebs, was a window he had never noticed. Its glass was dusty, but when the bee touched it with her wing, the dust scattered like snow. Beyond the glass, the garden was gray and still, every blade of grass frozen mid-sway. "The world forgot the song," the queen said softly, "but now you remember it. Sing it through the glass, and everything will wake." Cog took a deep breath and opened his mouth. A dusty window in an attic, a boy with a glowing flower in his hands, a tiny bee circling his head. Outside, a gray frozen garden, with one blade of green grass starting to bend, dust motes sparkling in the light, but no sound came out. He tried again, his throat tight and dry. The flower in his hands trembled, its light flickering. The queen buzzed nervously, circling his head. "Think of the colors, the hum of the hive, the taste of honey," she whispered. Cog closed his eyes and remembered the bee-striped scarves, the floating pianos, the smile that had started in the garden. Oh, a warmth spread from his chest, and a note, low and round as a pebble, rolled from his lips. The glass shimmered, and outside, one blade of grass bent. A boy with closed eyes holds a glowing flower on a cliff top, a small musical note floating from his lips, a golden bee crawling free from a shimmering crack in the air, with a bee queen on his shoulder, dreamy, soft watercolor style with warm yellows and greens. Cog opened his eyes. The note, a tiny pearl of sound, hovered in the air before him. The queen landed on his shoulder, and together they watched as the bee, upon hearing the music, twitched its antennae. Then, with a slow and determined hum, it crawled backward out of the spell web. The glass cracked, a single thin line, and the flower in Cog's hands bloomed fully, its light now steady and warm. A smiling, mechanical boy with a glowing flower in his hands, a tiny queen bee on his shoulder, standing in a sunny meadow where all the flowers are softly glowing in harmony, the remains of a cracked glass web dissolving into sparkling dust. Cog smiled and held the flower up to the sky. The queen buzzed a happy tune, and all the meadow flowers joined in, glowing softly. The spell web faded to dust in the breeze. From that day on, Cog and the queen flew together, mending the world with notes and petals, one gentle sound at a time. The end.